Hello there, I am Jaxon. In this episode, I'll be breaking down fatal shark attacks, from a woman who fell overboard into the open ocean at night, to a photographer who stepped past every barrier put in place to keep her alive. Each of these stories comes down to a single decision that couldn't be undone. Let's start with the first story, where we dive into the last moments of Vanessa Rainer eaten by 5 sharks. It was July 19th, 2016, roughly 40 miles off the Bahamian coastline, where the Atlantic rolled in long, dark swells under a cloudless sky. Beyond the vessel's lights, the water was black and completely unreadable in every direction. Vanessa Rainer, 29, was a travel content creator from Miami, Florida. She had built a following of roughly 6,000 across social media by filming luxury yacht excursions, offshore nightlife, and diving clips throughout the Bahamas. She was comfortable on boats and traveled the route between South Florida and the islands regularly, though she held no formal maritime safety certification and no open water dive qualification. The evening of July 19th began as a private charter trip organized through an independent operator based out of a small marina near Nassau. The vessel traveled approximately 40 miles offshore with a group of 8 passengers, running most of the day before transitioning into an evening excursion. Several hours before the incident, crew members had cleaned fish on the upper deck, discarding waste overboard. Whether that contributed to shark presence in the area by the time of the fall is a factor investigators noted but could not directly confirm. Offshore shark presence in deep Atlantic water is common independent of localized bait conditions. I want to flag something here, because it's easy to read that detail about the fish cleaning and assume it explains everything. It might be relevant, it might not. What I think matters more is what 40 miles offshore in the dark actually means for a man overboard situation, and I don't think most people who board a private charter truly process that. You are far out. The water is invisible past 20 feet in any direction, and if someone goes over the side, you are working against conditions that simply don't exist close to shore. That reality tends to set in only after something goes wrong. Oceanic white-tip sharks are apex open ocean predators inhabiting deep water beyond the continental shelf. They average between 6 and 13 feet in length and are characterized by broad, rounded pectoral fins and a persistent investigative approach to unfamiliar stimuli in open water. Unlike reef species, oceanic white-tips are not depth-dependent. They are drawn to organic material and surface disturbance and are well documented in offshore Atlantic water, where scent trails carry across long distances in open current. Historically, they are considered one of the most dangerous species in open ocean man-overboard scenarios, not because they are the largest shark, but because they are where you are when everything else has already gone wrong. Near midnight, a weather shift moved through the area and swells increased. Vanessa was on the upper deck, positioned at the outer railing with a camera, when the hull pitched sharply in a large swell. She lost footing and fell from approximately 8 feet above the waterline directly into the ocean. What followed on the vessel was chaotic. In the noise and darkness of open water at night, a significant delay passed before anyone activated the man overboard alarm. Witness accounts of the sequence and timing during those first minutes varied considerably and were never precisely reconstructed. By the time the crew brought the spotlight around and began assessing the water, multiple dorsal fins were visible near the vessel. Witnesses reported over 5 large sharks in the illuminated zone, though precise counts and species identification under those conditions, darkness, rough water, high stress, were not reliably possible. Maneuvering the vessel toward Vanessa's position in the swells with fin activity in the immediate recovery area prevented any safe approach. Vanessa disappeared beneath the surface before any recovery line or flotation equipment reached her position. The crew contacted maritime authorities by radio, and a response team arrived several hours later. A search the following morning recovered damaged clothing and surface blood dispersal that had spread outward in the overnight current. No body was ever located. The incident was filed as a maritime fatality. No formal charges were brought against the operator, as the fall was determined to be accidental. The operating area was unrestricted, and the operator held a valid independent license. This one is difficult because Vanessa didn't make a decision that anyone would flag as dangerous in the moment. Standing on an upper deck with a camera is something people do on charter boats constantly. The fall was an accident, but what I keep coming back to when I look at this case is how the environment offshore at night eliminates the buffer that makes accidents survivable close to shore. 40 miles out, in the dark, in swells, the margin between a fall and a recovery is so thin that almost anything can close it entirely. I don't think that's something most people standing at a railing at midnight, 40 miles offshore, are actually thinking about. And that gap in awareness is part of what makes these outcomes so hard to reverse. The next story is equally troubling, but the circumstances are entirely different. Not an accident, and not a single lapse in judgment. This one involves a diver who had been warned repeatedly over many seasons, understood the risk, and continued operating in those conditions until the day they finally caught up with him. It was October 3rd, 2014, along a remote stretch of the South Australian coast where cold, deep water pressed against a shelf edge frequented by large marine mammals. The sky was overcast, and surface chop reduced visibility across the water considerably. Daniel Mercer, 41, had worked as a commercial spear fisherman along that coastline for over 15 years. He was physically imposing and methodologically self-reliant. Operating from a small, private aluminum vessel, he kept at a boat ramp shared by other local fishermen. He ran no crew, kept no deckhand, and held no formal maritime safety certification, though his field experience was extensive. Other fishermen who shared the ramp had observed his practice of diving alone near seal aggregation zones over multiple seasons and had raised concerns with him directly on various occasions. He was aware of the risk and continued regardless. That last part is the thing I find hardest to move past in this case. He wasn't uninformed. The people around him had told him more than once, and he continued anyway. I've read enough incident reports to understand that this is actually a very common pattern. Not recklessness in the dramatic sense, but a slow, incremental normalization of something dangerous because it hasn't produced a bad outcome yet. Every time you go out and come back, the risk feels like it was manageable until it isn't. By the morning of October 3rd, other vessels in the area had made surface sightings of large sharks near a bait school, approximately 4 miles offshore. A general advisory was transmitted over marine radio, noting confirmed sightings of large sharks in a zone roughly 2 miles from Mercer's estimated position. Great white sharks are the largest predatory fish in the ocean. Confirmed individuals have exceeded 20 feet in length and 4,500 pounds, with females consistently larger than males. In southern Australian coastal waters, great whites concentrate during periods of high seal and sea lion activity along the shelf edge. They are ambush predators that strike from below, targeting the midsection of prey with a single high-velocity bite designed to cause rapid incapacitation. They do not typically consume prey immediately, but deliver a primary strike and withdraw while the target is debilitated. Research confirms they can detect the chemical signature of blood and the vibration of struggling prey at distances exceeding 1 mile in open water. Mercer entered the water alone, approximately 3 miles offshore, towing a stringer of speared and bleeding fish attached to his weight belt, after a radio advisory about large shark activity 2 miles from his position had already been transmitted. I find that sequence genuinely hard to sit with. The warning reached him. He went in anyway. At approximately 10:40 in the morning, a fisherman on a nearby vessel roughly 300 yards away observed Mercer's float line go taut and then slack in rapid succession. Seconds later, a violent surface disturbance erupted near his dive flag. The specific mechanics of what occurred were not visible. From that distance, and in those conditions, witnesses described significant surface disruption near the flag, but a clear account of the strike itself was not available from any vantage point. By the time the nearby vessel reached the site, a matter of minutes, only equipment fragments and significant blood discoloration spreading outward in the current remained. Mercer did not resurface. A recovery effort over the following 2 days, involving a Coast Guard patrol vessel and 2 civilian boats coordinated through the local maritime authority, yielded partial remains. Identification was confirmed through dental records. The incident was classified as a fatal wildlife encounter. The shark was not pursued. Accounts circulated afterward suggesting Mercer had been consumed whole. Investigators specifically noted that claim as inconsistent with the physical evidence recovered. From what I've seen in maritime incident records, the accumulated familiarity pattern, where experience builds a tolerance for risk over time, shows up constantly in commercial fishing and diving fatalities. It's not that the person stops understanding the danger, it's that the danger stops feeling immediate because it hasn't materialized yet. Mercer had been in those conditions through hundreds of dives. October 3rd was the day the conditions he had always worked in finally produced the outcome they had always been capable of producing. The next case takes place in coastal water as well, but the circumstances are completely different. This victim wasn't in the water by choice. He entered it to resolve a mechanical problem, and a separate overlooked injury changed everything within seconds of immersion. It was February 11th, 2017, several miles off the KwaZulu-Natal coastline in South Africa, where the Indian Ocean ran a deep gray-green from runoff following days of heavy coastal storms. Visibility below the surface was extremely limited. The current moved steadily northward along the shore, and the water temperature sat at approximately 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Cipho Dlamini, 34, was a boat mechanic based in Durban who had grown up along this coastline from an early age. He worked independently, servicing recreational and fishing vessels out of a private slip at a local boatyard, and maintained his own inflatable motorized fishing boat. He was comfortable in the ocean from years of exposure and spent most weekends offshore with a small group of friends. On the morning of February 11th, during the loading of gear before launch, a fishhook caught Cipho's left forearm, opening a shallow but actively bleeding wound. He wrapped it loosely in a cloth and proceeded with the trip without further treatment. That detail, wrapping it in a cloth and getting on with the day, is the kind of thing that makes complete sense in the moment. It's a fishhook cut. People get those constantly. You wrap it and move on. What I think this case illustrates so clearly is that a decision that is completely reasonable in one context becomes a critical factor in a completely different one, and there's often no visible warning that the context has changed. Cipho didn't enter the water because he forgot about the cut. He entered it because the propeller was fouled and the boat needed to move. The wound just happened to still be bleeding. Several miles offshore, a length of rope from a drifting mooring buoy became fouled around the boat's propeller. With the motor off and the vessel drifting, Cipho moved to the stern to clear the tangle manually. Large bull sharks are well documented along the KwaZulu-Natal coast during seasonal migrations, and turbid post-storm conditions are consistently associated with elevated near-shore activity. Sharks rely heavily on chemical detection and electroreception rather than vision, making them particularly effective in low-visibility water. An open wound introduces blood into the water column at the exact point where the swimmer is already partially immersed. Low visibility removes the swimmer's ability to detect an approach while doing nothing to reduce the shark's ability to detect the swimmer. That asymmetry, where the predator knows more about the situation than the person in the water, is one of the most consistent features in coastal attack records, and it's one of the most difficult things to account for in real time. Cipho entered the water at the stern, while his two companions remained aboard. Short time after he entered, one companion observed a large dorsal fin break the surface at a distance from the vessel, moving in the direction of Cipho's position. What followed was difficult for witnesses to reconstruct with any precision. One companion described reaching over the stern with a rope before the surface near Cipho became violently disturbed. Water visibility at the stern dropped to near zero almost immediately from turbulence and discoloration, cutting off visual contact. Both companions described hearing and feeling the impact before they lost visual contact entirely. One activated the vessel's emergency beacon. The other struck at the water with a boat hook without clear effect. Even reading through the witness accounts on cases like this, I'm struck by how fast the situation goes from normal to unrecoverable. There's no prolonged sequence of events. There's just a dorsal fin, and then there isn't anything to see anymore. The species involved was not confirmed at the scene. Investigators described the shark as large based on witness descriptions, though reliable size estimates from observers under those conditions, panic, turbulent water, no visibility, are generally not possible. The nearest Coast Guard relay station was approximately 45 minutes from the position. By the time responders arrived, only biological trace material and damaged equipment remained at the site. The current had dispersed surface evidence northward. No body was recovered. The incident was filed as a maritime fatality. Investigators noted the open wound as one of several environmental factors present at the time of the encounter. His family in Durban arranged a memorial service within the week. What I keep thinking about in this case is how little it would have taken to change the outcome, not even dramatically. Treat the wound properly before launch. Use a tool to clear the propeller instead of going in. Neither of those is a major intervention. But in the middle of a morning on the water, with a boat that needs to get moving, those small steps get skipped. And in the wrong conditions, the wrong location, on the wrong day, skipping them is the difference. The next story moves to entirely different conditions. Not offshore, not a work scenario, not a result of any specialized risk. This one happened in shallow surf on a weekend afternoon, in water that most people entering a Gulf Coast beach wouldn't think twice about. It was June 28, 2015, along a Gulf Coast beach in the Florida Panhandle, where flat, warm water stretched out in slow, rolling waves, and dozens of beachgoers filled the shallow surf on a clear weekend afternoon. Nothing about the scene looked like a warning. Rachel Holloway, 22, was a college student from San Antonio, Texas, vacationing along the Gulf Coast with 4 close friends between summer sessions. She had grown up around water, spending summers at lakes and coastal beaches across the South, and was a confident swimmer with no documented history of water safety incidents. Earlier that week, lifeguard stations at a nearby stretch of beach had logged visual sightings of sharks near the mouth of an estuary outlet, approximately a quarter-mile down the shoreline. Yellow advisory flags had been posted at several stations as a result. Those flags were visible from the area where Rachel and her group were wading on the afternoon of June 28th. I want to be honest about something here, because I think it matters. Advisory flags at a beach are easy to dismiss when the water looks the way Gulf water looks on a clear afternoon in June. Flat, warm, full of other people. I've been at beaches with yellow flags flying and watched hundreds of people walk straight into the surf without a second look. The flags communicate risk, but they don't communicate what that risk looks like. And when nothing looks dangerous, the flag feels like a formality. I'm not saying that excuse is ignoring them. I'm saying I understand exactly how it happens. Bull sharks are among the most dangerous shark species in coastal waters globally and are the primary species responsible for near-shore attacks along the Gulf of Mexico. Adults typically range between 7 and 11 feet and can exceed 500 pounds. They are unique among large shark species for their documented ability to tolerate low salinity environments, estuaries, river mouths, and brackish inlets, and are regularly confirmed in water as shallow as 2 feet. Bull sharks operate in surf zones where humans routinely wade, and their presence at very shallow depths is not incidental to their behavior. It reflects their natural habitat range. That's the part people consistently underestimate. It's not that the shark came close to shore. Shore is where it lives. On the afternoon of June 28th, the tidal current was running towards the estuary outlet, and schools of bait fish had gathered unusually close to shore throughout the day, conditions commonly associated with increased predator presence in the nearshore zone. Rachel's group was wading in waist-deep water, roughly 30 yards from the shore break. A waterproof camera drifted from the group on the tidal pull, and Rachel moved to retrieve it, entering slightly deeper water and separating herself by roughly 15 feet from the nearest person. Witnesses nearby described sudden, violent movement in the surf before anyone in the group registered what was happening. A large shark struck Rachel in the leg and lower torso region. Lifeguards responded quickly, and she was dragged from the surf by guards and a bystander. Emergency procedures were initiated immediately, and air transport was requested. Despite the speed of the response, the severity of the injuries produced blood loss that beach-level equipment could not adequately address. Rachel was pronounced deceased at a regional medical center. Investigators later noted that the response time was not a contributing factor in the outcome. The incident was classified as a fatal shark attack. The beach closed for the remainder of that day. No formal review of the local advisory flag procedures was initiated. The shark was not pursued. Lifeguards later reported catastrophic damage to the upper thigh region consistent with femoral artery trauma. Rachel's case doesn't have a dramatic decision at its center. She wasn't ignoring a restriction, or chasing a shot, or dismissing a direct warning. She drifted 15 feet from her group to grab a camera. That's the part that sits with me the most about this one. How ordinary the moment was, in water that looked completely safe, with people all around her. The animal that killed her wasn't in deep water. It was in the same surf everyone else was standing in. The next story involves 2 victims and a completely different setting, a remote tidal channel, after dark, where the group didn't stumble into danger. They carried the conditions for it in with them. It was August 14th, 2018, on a remote outer island in the western Pacific, where a narrow tidal channel cut through a coral formation and connected a shallow lagoon to open ocean. At night, when the tide shifted and current through the channel accelerated, the water ran fast, dark, and turbulent. Tyler Vance, 19, and Eli Navarro, 20, were part of a group of 4 friends traveling through remote Pacific island chains following high school graduation. The group had spent the summer filming travel content, cliff jumps, cave swims, and high-risk recreational footage at various locations throughout the trip. Neither Tyler nor Eli had formal ocean safety training or open water dive certification. The tidal channel they reached on the evening of August 14th had been formally closed to public access by local authorities approximately 3 weeks prior. The closure followed repeated confirmed sightings of large sharks moving through the channel during nighttime tidal shifts, a documented pattern in that region where accelerating current through a narrow reef pass concentrates bait fish and draws predatory sharks through in significant numbers. Warning signs had been posted at both ends of the channel access path, and residents of the nearest village had directed multiple tourists away from the specific location on separate occasions during that same week. I'll be straightforward about how I feel about this case, because I think it warrants it. Every safeguard that exists for a situation like this was in place. The closure was there. The signs were there. Local people had personally warned tourists away from that channel during that same week. And the group showed up at night, went around or past the warning signs, and then, rather than simply being near the water, actively introduced fish scraps into it to try to attract sharks. I understand the impulse to film something dramatic. I don't understand doing it there, at night, in a formally closed predator zone, with bait. Those aren't factors that crept up on them. They brought most of them. Tiger shark species in tropical Pacific environments are active hunters during tidal shifts through reef channels, using concentrating current to their advantage as prey moves through in reduced visibility. The introduction of fish waste or blood into a tidal channel during this kind of shift substantially increases the likelihood of shark presence and activity within the channel. At night, surface visibility from above drops to near zero, and detecting shark movement in fast-moving water with handheld lights is not reliably possible. The group arrived at the channel after 11 p.m. with handheld lights and a bag of fish scraps collected from a local fisherman's cleaning station earlier that day. Over approximately 20 to 30 minutes, scraps were thrown into the water from a rocky ledge at the channel's edge. 2 members of the group remained on the upper ledge. Tyler and Eli climbed down to a lower ledge, roughly 3 feet above the channel surface, and continued introducing bait into the water directly below. Fin activity was reported in the illuminated zone within minutes, though species identification at night, from the surface, in moving water with handheld lights, was not reliably possible. At some point, one or both of them entered or fell into the water at the channel's edge. The 2 remaining group members, who had stayed on the upper ledge, reported that what followed happened rapidly and in conditions that made it impossible to follow clearly. They described violent surface disturbance and sounds consistent with large animal activity before the situation became unrecoverable. Emergency contact was made with the nearest island authority shortly after midnight. By the time local responders reached the channel, Tyler and Eli were unaccounted for. Rescue divers arrived the following morning. Eli Navarro's body was recovered from the lagoon side of the channel at dawn, partially submerged behind a coral formation. Injuries were consistent with large animal bites across the torso and lower extremities. Tyler Vance was not found. A 4-day search of the channel and adjacent lagoon produced no results. The case was listed as a presumed drowning fatality pending further inquiry, though the physical evidence at the scene was inconsistent with drowning alone. Local authorities expanded the restricted zone and permanently closed nighttime access to the channel and surrounding lagoon areas following the incident. No charges were filed against the surviving group members. Tyler Vance was 19 years old. Eli Navarro was 20. That's the age where the gap between what you're capable of understanding and what you actually stop to consider is probably at its widest. I'm not saying that to excuse what happened. I'm saying it because I think it's honest, and because framing this as pure recklessness misses something. They didn't go there expecting to die. They went there expecting to get footage. The closure, the signs, the warnings, those probably registered as obstacles, not as real information about what the channel was like at night with bait in the water. That gap in comprehension isn't unique to them. It's just that in that location, on that night, it was fatal. The final story takes place in broad daylight, on a controlled tour, with safety barriers in place. It's the story of a photographer who looked at everything put in place to protect her and decided it was in the way. It was January 9th, 2013, off the coast of a small outer island in the Hawaiian island chain, where a private shark observation tour had anchored above a shallow reef shelf in approximately 25 feet of water. The sky was clear, surface conditions were calm, and underwater visibility was strong. Olivia Bennett, 31, was a wildlife photographer based in Portland, Oregon, who had built an online following of roughly 35,000 by documenting wildlife excursions from close range. She had a well-established pattern of pushing beyond the access boundaries established by guides and operators, and had positioned extreme proximity as a professional approach across multiple prior trips and posts. She traveled to Hawaii in January of 2013, specifically to photograph large pelagic species for a planned close-range image series. The operator she booked through was a small independent outfit running private shark viewing tours from a single vessel out of a local harbor on the island. The tours operated through a floating observation platform positioned at the vessel's stern, directly above a baited viewing zone with a metal barrier railing on 3 sides. Bait was deployed below the platform to draw sharks toward the surface, where passengers could observe and photograph from behind the railing. What I want to say here, and I think it's worth saying clearly, is that the barrier was not a restriction on the photography. The sharks were directly below the platform in clear water. Everyone behind that railing was getting close, unobstructed access to large, predatory sharks in open water. That's the whole point of the tour. The railing didn't ruin the shot. Olivia's decision to go past it tells me the issue wasn't access to the animals. It was a specific kind of thinking, one I've seen come up in wildlife photography incidents more than once, where the barrier is read as a limitation on what's possible, rather than a boundary that exists for a concrete reason. That reading has a way of ending badly. During the session, 2 large tiger sharks had been drawn into the viewing zone and were actively circling close to the surface below the platform. A third individual had made close passes near the platform structure earlier in the session. Tiger sharks are the second most frequently implicated species in fatal shark attacks worldwide. They average between 10 and 14 feet, with large individuals exceeding 1,000 pounds. Research on tiger shark behavior in baited observation settings documents repeated close approaches to floating structures, including direct contact with platform surfaces. This is a known and expected behavior in an active baited session. It is something the barrier and platform design account for specifically. A tiger shark already circling in a baited zone will close on surface objects at close range. That is not an aberration. That is the session running exactly as it runs. Crew members had instructed passengers throughout the session to stay behind the barrier rail and keep equipment within the platform perimeter. Olivia had extended a 5-foot camera pole over the railing to capture low-angle footage of the sharks approaching from below. Crew members requested twice that she bring the pole back within the perimeter. A large tiger shark, described by crew as one of the animals circling throughout the session, made contact with the underside or side of the platform. Crew accounts described a bump or impact felt on the structure. Olivia, leaning forward over the railing with the pole extended, lost her balance in the resulting movement and fell into the water. Crew immediately deployed a throw ring and activated the retrieval line from the deck. The shark, already circling in the baited zone, made contact with Olivia within seconds of her entering the water. Recovery efforts using the throw ring and deck line were not completed before that contact occurred. Olivia was pulled onto the platform by crew members within approximately 90 seconds of the fall. She was alive but critically injured. The vessel moved immediately toward the nearest harbor, while crew administered first aid. Emergency services met the vessel at the dock. Olivia was pronounced deceased at a small local medical clinic within the hour. Cause of death was listed as acute blood loss from traumatic injury sustained in the water. The incident was reviewed by the state and the local maritime authority. The operator was found to have followed standard protocols and issued appropriate instructions throughout the session. No license action was taken. Tours continued the following season with updated barrier configurations.